So at that point, the doctor came in and she sat us down and told us, at this point, if your daughter's body is spitting out white blood cells this fast, the prognosis for her is very low. Your daughter will probably die.
This is our story.
I'd been struggling with lupus diagnosis for the last 2 years. We had kind of decided, though, we were going to give my body a little bit of break from having children to see if I could get my body to heal. All of a sudden, we found out that we were pregnant, and we were kind of freaking out a little bit. I think when we initially found out, we were very excited. We want more children. We want as many children as Yahweh will give us. But at the same time, we didn't know how my body was going to hold up, and I've been on several medications that they advise you don't get pregnant while you're taking these medications. We had several people come to us after we found out we were pregnant and just tell us, you need to be prepared for whatever happens. The baby, there could be issues with the baby, could have birth defects, just the long list of things that could possibly go wrong. A little bit into the pregnancy, I think I was having a lot of fear. The name came to me, Emuna. So the name Emuna means faith in Hebrew. And that really kind of spoke to me, and I felt like, you know what, that's going to be the name of our baby. I didn't know whether it was going to be a girl or a boy, but I just kind of had a sense that it was going to be a girl and that her name was going to be Emuna. So we decided, at that point in the pregnancy, I just decided I'm going to have faith, and no matter what happens, I'm going to trust Yahweh in this situation. And so we started the long, arduous, all the appointments, and we had to go to high-risk OBGYN to get ultrasounds. Like, sometimes it was once a week we were getting ultrasounds, and throughout every, step of the way, it just, we'd get an ultrasound. It was like, oh, your baby is completely textbook. Like, there's, everything is just falling into place. It was just always that kind of, you're kind of expecting to hear something's wrong, but then it all just was going perfectly.
Hey guys, we're here at the hospital. I'm about 34 and a half weeks, and it seems like I'm in labor. So just pray that everything goes well.
Hey, here we are. Number 7, when you're 16 and watching this, or getting married. Emuna Simcha Shalom. We're excited. We're excited to meet you. This is a brand new adventure for us, and we're learning to trust Yahweh, to have faith, like your name says, Emuna. Simcha, to have joy, and Shalom, to have peace. So we're praying for those 3 themes for your birth and for your life. We love you. Little girl, we'll see you soon, okay?
Went in to the hospital, and the baby just kind of slipped right out. It was a very quick delivery. Her blood sugar was low, so they ended up taking her to the NICU, and we had to spend 9 days in the NICU. Her lungs were perfect, never had to be on oxygen, never had any issues other than just having to, her sucking reflex was a little weak, and and she was just very sleepy, and it was hard for her to get enough food down. What are you doing?
Feeding her, I'm loving her, giving her all that she needs, and every now and then when she needs it most, I give her a pep talk. Hi there, sweet lovable girl. You're so cute looking at me, see? And then that's the nice Abba, and then sometimes we need the pep talk Abba, which is kind of like this. Look at me. It's time to drink this milk so we can get home. Don't smile at me like that. You heard what I said? Yes. Drink it, and drink it now. Do you understand? Our children are very excited to see her, and we would like to take them back to see our children. So, bring it. Bring it.
We came home, everything was great, she was perfect, healthy, nursing and drinking her bottles like a champ. We were 2 months in, and she came down with a fever. Seemed very kind of lethargic. And by the second day, she wasn't really eating anything. So we made the decision to go into the hospital. They took an x-ray of her lungs, and she had pneumonia in her lungs. When we got to Vanderbilt, they did the swab, and they found out that she had 3 different viruses all at the same time. She had pertussis, adenovirus, and rhinovirus. So they said, well, we're probably gonna have to keep her overnight. And she started kind of having these coughing episodes. And when she would have these coughing episodes, her oxygen saturation would dip very low. So they ended up calling in the ICU team. I remember them wheeling her out on this bed. She stares right into your soul, looking at me like, what's gonna happen? It was just breaking my heart to see her go through this. When we got there, they had taken her white blood cell count. The thing with pertussis is that it puts off this toxin that creates a very high white blood cell count. And so they wanted to monitor it and hope that with the antibiotics and everything they were giving her, that it would eventually start to come down. As the days went on, it just kept getting higher and higher. The issue with the white blood cells being too high is that causes your blood to be very sticky, and it can cause things like organ failure, cardiac arrest, just because the blood can't flow through the veins. The normal count was, 7 to 14, and hers had gotten up to 60. They were very nervous, and they said they wanted to do a blood transfusion in order to take out some of the white blood cells.
They tried hyperhydration first, so they blew her up like a balloon, overloaded her body with fluid. She looked like a little Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. She had a big old fluid shell on her back. It was really hard to watch. She was probably 3 times the size that she normally would be, and the whole goal was to try and hyperhydrate her body so that her blood was not as sticky. And that did not work, and her heart, the echocardiogram started showing that the septum in the heart, the middle wall in the heart, was starting to push over into the left side of the heart, and that was very, very dangerous due to pulmonary hypertension or high blood pressure in her lungs, and that's why they had to finally make the decision to do the transfusion.
They had to get a direct line. It was a sterile procedure, and they said we had to leave the room.
I'm a paramedic, and so I had tried to make a deal with the fellowship doctor. I said, look, let me just stay in here. I'll get sterile, and I'll just stay here and watch. And then she said, I'll tell you what, why don't we let you stay for most of the procedure, and then you go out at the sterile part. So I said, fine, that's fine. And when I said goodbye, I got down right on her little nose, and her face was all swollen and everything, but I gave her a little snuggle bunny, which we put our little noses together, and she gets this smile on her face, and she crunches her nose. It wasn't like this big moment where I was like, oh my goodness, what's gonna happen, after this? I felt completely at peace, and, that's the question. Was that the last time that I got to spend with my daughter?
We went off into a little family room thing overlooks the city, and we were just kind of waiting there, just praying that everything would go well. The resident came in, and she sat down and said, we were trying to get the direct line, and I'm so sorry, but her airway collapsed while we were in the middle of doing it, and we had to intubate her. We were able to get the direct line, but she's now intubated, and we have the vent breathing for her. It just seemed like at that point, like everything was just going wrong. Our little girl's sitting there just sedated, and the vent is breathing for her now. But once they got the PICC line, they were able to start the blood transfusion. So they had to do just syringes where they would push some blood into the syringe and then suck some blood out the other. I think within like the first 1 or 2 syringes, because of how sticky her blood was, her blood clotted off in the line that they had gotten. So it was just like, oh, okay, now another thing has gone wrong. So they put the blood thinner into the line to try and dissolve the clot, and they had to wait for like a half hour, but we're on a time frame because the blood only lasts for a certain amount of time once they've taken it out of the fridge. The clot eventually dissolved. They were able to get most of the transfusion. I think it clotted off several times during the blood transfusion, which just... So they were able to complete it, and they gave it a little bit of time for all the blood to mix, and they took her blood again and saw that the white blood cells had come down. It was
half,
30.
60 to 30. It needed to be at least under 25.
So they wanted to do the second blood transfusion. And same thing, it clotted off several times. but they were able to finish it. So we were all excited. Okay, she's gonna be okay now. They took her blood. The white blood cells had only come down to 27. And so at that point, the doctor came in and she sat us down and told us, at this point, if your daughter's body is spitting out white blood cells this fast, the prognosis for her is very low. Your daughter will probably die. We just kind of lost it at that point. And a few days ago, she was just a healthy, happy little baby, and now they're telling me that she's gonna die. And so I'm just like pacing in the hospital. I didn't want to leave her side if this was like gonna be some of my last moments with her. So I was like torn, but like I couldn't stand to be in that hospital room any longer. And we ended up going out to the little garden area in the hospital and just falling on our knees and praying. And I sent out a little text on our church fellowship and said, we need you guys to move heaven for us, and because the doctors just told us it's going to take a miracle for her to survive this. They were praying, but I think after this they had really started taking it seriously. And
24 hours a day, our church group started. Everybody had signed up for hours, and they were praying around the clock, which was such a massive part of this story. I know, like, one of the women in our fellowship, even the little children, like she said that their little girl, just got down on her knees crying out to Yahweh, just that the baby would be okay. And so there's just so many stories of like people just getting down on their knees, and I was just crying, and I was like, Yahweh, her name is Emuna Simcha Shalom, and I feel like that was the promise that you gave us when you gave us this little girl. And I will be faithful no matter what happens. I'll be faithful to you. Like, if you gave us this name, like, part of her name, Simcha Shalom, is joy and peace, faith that brings joy and peace. How could this situation bring joy and peace if she dies? For your name's sake, for me to defend your name to everybody around us, to my children, to the people in our fellowship, please save her life. So we went back up to the hospital room where she was at, and Sam got out the guitar and just started playing worship over her. And I think at that point you kind of said a little prayer, and it was kind of like a goodbye in a way, like in our hearts. I was saying goodbye. Exalted, the King is exalted on high. I love you. It felt like giving her over to Yahweh to do what he wanted, and it's kind of like in Isaac. We're asking him to save her, but at the same time surrendering her over to him. And so the attending doctor, the boss lady, came in, and she said, look, we have actually had the blood observed underneath a microscope, and they count individual white blood cells. So there's different types of white blood cells, and the specific type of white blood cell that creates the stickiness, they're called lymphocytes. And she said we actually counted each individual lymphocyte, and even though the overall white blood cell count has not come down far enough, the individual lymphocyte count has come down enough, and I feel very positive about her prognosis. All my heaviness, and I put on this garment of praise. You turn my morning into dancing, and you turn my night into day. Put on my garment of praise. You turn my morning into dancing, and you turn my night into day. I was like, what? It was just like a very nonchalant kind of, she was listening to her heart. And she's got her stethoscope on, and she's like, so they observed it under the microscope, and her lymphocytes are now within normal range. And we were just like...
text our whole church group and let them know, like, several hours later, okay, your prayers have moved heaven.
So one of the hardest parts about this whole journey was being separated from our children. We were 24/7 at the hospital, and our family still needed to be raised at home, which was really difficult. So trying to find the balance of that, and so there would be just a couple days when we could come home, and it was always so hard to come back to our normal life here with our children, and yet know that we had, responsibilities, and we've always felt like we were leaving our baby alone, which we normally had somebody there. So on one of these trips home, we had booked tickets a year in advance for a Spartan race that I was going to run with some of my children, and I really had a firm feeling that we should go forward with it. And so the night before I left to go out to do this Spartan race, it was completely exhausting, up all night with the baby, staff assist, just very emotionally traumatic. And got up the next morning, drove an hour, and met up with my children. And it all of a sudden, this is the first one I'd ever done, it all of a sudden dawned on me that it was a physical representation of what was happening to us spiritually. And that there is an element of endurance that God takes us through when we go through these difficult challenges that pretty much everybody, I think, goes through these type of things. And that endurance is part of the process. For whatever reason, the endurance and the pain and the suffering has to be there in order to create this change in us that's needed. And so it just clicked with me in that moment that you don't stop, you continue to keep going. And that's part of the faith building process, is the endurance. I work in a job where my job is to think about the worst case scenario, and so we had just, and it was kind of like a Peter moment. We had just, I just walked on water. We had just heard that, and then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, but that doesn't mean that she's actually going to be okay. It just means for this moment.
It was just a roller coaster of a ride. She would get into these coughing fits to where she would start to turn blue, and you'd see her oxygen go down. It would go all the way down. I think it went down to 5 at one point. But every single time, you've got your nurse there, and she sees her, and she has to run in, when these coughing attacks start, and they start bagging her to try and get her oxygen level up, and then her oxygen level is still plummeting, she's still coughing. They push the staff assist button, and we get like 15 people running into the room. We got
doctors,
people
nurses from all over the hospital,
her, trying to stretch her head out to get her neck into the right position so they could seal the bag. And it was just this traumatic experience. And there was days where this happened it'd
be like 5 or 6 times a night. We'd be sleeping in the room with her, and her alarms would start to go off. And, your daughter's not breathing. We jump out of bed, she's blue. And the nurse comes running in, and all the doctors come in. It was just traumatic, and it would happen over and over. And you're like, is this the last time? Is she not going to pull out of this one? It was very traumatic. So during one of these staff assists, there was a doctor, Dr. Wolf. And Dr. Wolf is a Jewish man. I think he was a secular Jew, done some study over in Israel. He was one of the ones that came running one of these nights, and he asked what her name was, and I said her name's Emuna. And he said, oh, the Hebrew spelling, because a lot of people say Emuna. So he could tell from the pronunciation that it was Israeli. And so I said, he said, very interesting. So he said, do you know what it means? And I said, well, I think I know what it means. It means faith. And he said, every morning, every Jewish person, before their feet hit the floor, they recite a prayer called Moda Ani. And he said, every morning they say your daughter's name. And I could tell as he was talking to me, he was reliving some distant experience that he had had in his childhood. And so that night I was talking with my mom, and that story came up, and she's like, wow, and if anybody knows my mom, everything is a miracle to her, kind of thing. She said, wow, that's so amazing. You're getting to, minister to these, be a light to these Jewish people. And I said, Mom, that guy's probably never going to remember this. It means nothing to him. And the subsequent night, we had or maybe it was 2 nights later, we had another staff, 5 or 6 staff, and says, I'm exhausted, I'm frustrated, and here comes Dr. Wolf running. We end up bagging her up, she's okay, and and Dr. Wolf is over there, and he's kind of an interesting character. He's probably in his 40s, and he's just kind of stroking his lightly stubble chin. And he says, you know, I was thinking about your daughter yesterday driving home from work, and automatically the bells and whistles go off in my mind that, you know, I thought this guy didn't even think about it. And apparently he said, I was driving home and I was thinking about your daughter. And he said, I remember the last line of the Modani. It says, Rebbe Emuna, which is, great is your faithfulness. And he said, I need to reconnect more with my roots and where I came from. And my mind just exploded that God was using the pain and the suffering and all of these things. You know, it's so hard to see a child suffer. And these people see children suffer every day, and yet this one moment stuck out in this doctor's mind, and he wanted to reconnect. So I found this Bible. I had flopped it open to Psalm 66, but it's something that God had told me before she got sick, that I needed to write a song about Psalm 66. So there's a point in the Psalm right here, verse 8, it says, Bless our God, O peoples, and sound his praise abroad, who keeps us in life. And I felt like that was a promise, and does not allow our feet to slip. For you have tried us, O God. You have refined us as silver is fine. You brought us into the net. You laid an oppressive burden on our loins, and you made men ride over our heads. We went through fire and through water, yet you brought us out into this place of abundance. And I was like, man, this is our psalm. So I underlined it, and I would leave that on her bed. And it got stained with water, and it was like this verse was sustaining us. This bread from heaven was sustaining us through this period of time in the hospital.
Felt like Yahweh was really speaking to us through the Psalms of the day.
It was following our journey. We would wake up in the morning for the psalm. We're like, oh, what's going to happen today? Let's read the psalm.
It would give me this like outlook on the day. And so Psalm 21, you know, everything up until September 21st had been like just very like touch and go. Like her white blood cells kept rising and rising and rising. And then Psalm 21, it says, he asked life from you and you gave it to him. And so I felt like that was the promise for that day, and that was the day that she had to be intubated. The next day, the day after that.
The day after she was intubated.
That morning, I got up and I was like, oh, we got the blood transfusion done. You know, everything's probably going to start looking better today. And I get up and I read this psalm. My God, why have you forsaken me? Far from my deliverance are the words of my groaning. Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer. I was just like, oh no, what's going to happen today? So, and it ended up being that day we got the really hard news that she wasn't going to make it. You know, you read on, and by the end, but when he cried to him for help, he heard.
For me comes my praise in the great assembly, and I shall pay my vows. So there's this give and take that we were learning about, okay, if we go through something hard, Yahweh brings us through it. We have a response to praise and to thank him. And it always says in the great assembly, it's like these testimonies need to be shared with the people that you fellowship and worship with. And that's kind of why we're making this video.
Spiritual warfare. We're not going to allow anything in this room that is going to try to seek her harm and to be not in line with what Yahweh's will is. Have the Bible constantly playing in her room, and we would have worship music playing on, you know, one on the iPad, one on the computer.
We would play guitar and sing to her. We had kind of a thing where we'd get up every day and we'd read the Torah portion, and then we would have worship. And it was really interesting. There's so many hurting people. I always say that the PICU is like the side of town that you don't want to raise your kids in. I mean, it's so hard to be there. And so we'd be playing this music, and we'd be playing it quietly, but the people around it would hear, and the nurses would come in, they'd be like, oh man, that's amazing. And there's nothing special. We're not anything special, but it's like people were so hungry just for the hope that music brings. I'm trading my sickness. I'm trading my pain. I'm laying them down for the joy of the Lord. When you're in pain, you got to praise. We were there for 6 weeks, and all these families would go home. They would come in, and their kid would be there for 2 or 3 days. Then they just waltz out, and they would say, "Thank you so much. Your music, you have no idea what your music meant to us." And then we would just watch it come and go, and we're like, Like, Yahweh, when's it gonna be our turn to go home?
Being there for so long, there's different like abuse situations and stuff going on, and you'd hear people down the hall like just yelling and screaming, "I didn't do it!" and their babies in the room. We just, shut the doors, keep playing our music, and it just like one of my favorite songs to listen to during this whole time was "Harpoo," and it was by Mikedem, and it's "Be Still and Know That I Am God," and it's just this like peaceful. I would just play it over her through the coughing fits, through all this turmoil that was going on. It was just like it always just was able to like calm me and bring us back to our focus is on Yahweh. Be still and know that I am God. They took the tube out after about a week and a half. When you're intubated, you have to be such heavy sedation. There's so many drugs that it just looks like a spaceship was running her body. She started waking up. You have to slowly wean off of each one of these drugs.
Can you say hi to everybody that's been praying for you? Can you say hi to everybody?
When we had moved to the floor, she was pretty much getting close to, being weaned off of the drugs. And she was just miserable that night. But there was a chance, because she had not had any desaturation. She had been off of oxygen for 24 hours. And there was a chance that we could go home in the morning.
Nothing is too difficult for you, not even getting out of the PICU. Nothing is too difficult for you, not even getting out of the PICU. Ah, Lord God.
But she was not happy. She was just completely stressed out. She was consolable as long as you were holding her or rocking her.
She did not sleep.
Yeah, 48 hours without sleeping. But we were like, all right, you know what? We're going to get through this. So we asked the nurses if we could get a portable monitor. We took her on a little walk. I put her in my little pouch, and she had the monitor, connected to her.
3 o'clock in the morning.
So we would go downstairs to the chapel, and there's this grand piano, and we just sit down and we're just playing music. This could be our last night in the hospital. If we can do it, like, we're going to stay up. We're going to do what we can.
We could see the light at the end of the tunnel, but you have literally no control over whether you go or you stay. And I think that God wanted to bring us to that point of surrender, because the very next day,
we got to come home.
Bye, you guys. Bye, sweetness.
Pretty exciting, isn't it?
Are you staying continuously?